And that is the explanation for Charles's introduction when he says that the debate has widened out in recent months. I'm interested in this topic for lots of different reasons, but perhaps the one I will address today is the party political angle on it, because actually I think one of the most interesting things about the coalition is the ease with which the two parties have managed to coalesce around a shared agenda. It has happened, I think, in a way which has probably taken most onlookers by surprise, and probably both parties by surprise. The differences between the parties are well known and remain in many areas. But what I think had not been sufficiently understood was the degree of overlap in their worldviews. Now, this doesn't stretch across the entirety of both parties. I wouldn't claim that the right of the Conservative Party and the left of the Liberal Democrats have got anything like as much in common as the right of the Liberal Democrats and the left of the Conservative Party. But nonetheless, particularly at the leadership level, there is, I think, a shared vision of the good society and indeed good governance, the proper and appropriate role of government in that. And it's an agenda that I think both parties reached, although it has philosophical roots in both the Conservative and Liberal traditions. I think they both reached it in large part as a result of being united in opposition to New Labour. New Labour, of course, we had a decade, just over a decade, of intense centralisation and a target-driven approach to governance, which to my mind was best summed up by the existence of the delivery unit in number 10. And I remember reading an article in the newspaper in the early days of New Labour, where the head of the delivery unit had invited the Prime Minister then, Tony Blair, and the Chancellor then, Gordon Brown, to come and watch a PowerPoint display, and the media were also invited. And they sat down, and a man stood up, an official stood up at the front of the room, and he had everything but the white coat, but he basically had a stick and a PowerPoint presentation. And it showed in great detail how money would be poured in the top of this big bureaucratic machine, and it would then bounce down like a sort of arcade game, when inputs and then all these other levels and public service delivery agreements and targets and outputs and outcomes and so forth. And at the bottom was supposed to fall out a better society, better educated children, healthier people coming out of hospital and all the rest of it. And of course, it didn't work. And government doesn't work like that. Bureaucracies, and this is, I think, the shared insight of both the Liberal Democrats and the Conservative parties, is that bureaucracies find it very difficult even to function efficiently, let alone to deliver profound positive social and economic change. So I think that the roots of the shared agenda around which the two parties have come together in this coalition are to be found in the fact that they both sat on the opposition benches watching this great experiment in centralised bureaucratic governance, and they watched it fail. And so where they come together is on an agenda of radical decentralisation. And I think that agenda, and I think the post-bureaucratic age is another way of describing that agenda, as is the big society and so forth. That agenda is one which runs across all policy silos and is, in fact, the organising principle on which most of the domestic policy agenda stands. And it is so vast in its size that I'm not sure we can even yet see the horizon. I think that this is a potentially a 10-year project of reform. Don't read too much into that. I'm not talking about electoral pacts. I'm just saying that in terms of the size of the reforms in education, in the health service, in welfare, in criminal justice, in local government and their services, that it will probably take at least a decade to deliver. And I view this very much in the same way as the reforms of the nationalised industries and utilities in the 1980s. And as someone who has, I'm not a member of the Liberal Democrats, but someone who has got good links to the Lib Dems and has worked for the party in the past, I take huge pride in the fact that the Liberal Democrats, a party which were widely derided as not serious, not capable of taking tough decisions, are in fact very much engaged, not only in this necessary and difficult process of deficit elimination, but also in the no smaller, no less ambitious task of reforming our public services. And I think, as I say, and I'm going to shut up in a moment to allow others to speak, but I think that the central idea at the heart of this huge agenda, and around which both the coalition partners have coalesced so effortlessly, is that of a post-bureaucratic politics, a post-bureaucratic age. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Julian. Our own dear Neil O'Brien, please.
Well, thank you. It's amazing to see standing room only at an event on the post-bureaucratic age. Well, we've had bad experiences with bureaucracy. It's a huge pleasure to be doing this with Julian, who's been such a positive influence on particularly the Liberal Democrats, but in politics more generally, and also with Francis, who is, because he prepared so much before government, has completely hit the ground running and is just making amazing savings and doing amazing things at incredible pace. So great honour to have Francis here. If you had used the private sector service in the 1950s, you would have found it quite a bureaucratic experience. Let's say you went to the bank, you would have had to turn up within their very restrictive opening hours, and you would have had to stand in a queue, and you would have had to fill in a lot of forms, and it would have been generally a pretty excruciating 50s bureaucratic experience. It certainly can be, that's true. But these days you would go onto your online bank account and you can move money around the world seamlessly, and if you for example have bought some pints in the conference bar and you've hit a massive overdraft as a result, then you will get a text message from your bank and it will be relatively unbureaucratic. If you use many public services, you will have the same experience you would have had in the 1950s. You will stand in a queue, turn up in limited opening hours, and generally be treated as well, not as a customer or a value customer, shall we say. The post-bureaucratic age is a huge and important idea. There are a lot of different elements to it, and I thought, if you don't mind, I would do a very quick whistle-stop tour of some of what I see as the themes of the post-bureaucratic age. Now, a big part of this is about breaking up stodgy public sector monopolies. So, where information can drive choice, competition and higher standards, that's one of the central elements. So we're thinking about things like the school choice that Michael Gove is doing, hospital choice, GP choice that Andrew Lansdale is doing. A new element that this government are bringing to the equation is the attempt to bring greater accountability in public services where choice and competition are not going to work. So particularly the police, so police accountability, the election of police commissioners is a big part of that. Other things to do with making people accountable, like, for example, making the police publish crime maps so we can see how they're doing. Perhaps in the future, publishing reoffending rates on a prison-by-prison basis so we can see who the good and effective prisons are and who are the less effective ones. Francis is already using data very powerfully, publishing all items of government spending, every item of local government spending above 500 quid. Now, at first, a lot of local government people didn't like to do that, but now, as they're doing it, I increasingly get feedback from local government leaders, and they say, once we started doing this, we realised we're hemorrhaging money in all directions. So a very, very powerful tool. Beyond using IT and the opportunities of the 21st century to increase accountability, there's also a role for IT and communications technologies in just improving the way that services are run internally, not perhaps in ways that are immediately obvious to the public or visible. So, for example, if we have better IT in the Department of Work and Pensions, we can see that lots and lots of people are just going round and round in the system, making a benefits claim, going into work for a couple of months, making another claim, and then we can start to deal with them. This government, I hope, will be more successful than last government were in time to join up the prison service, the probation service, and other criminal justice services. At the moment, if you leave prison, the probation service may not know where you are, the chances of you getting a house, chances of you sorting out with your benefits and things like that are very, very low. And that's why people leave prison after to have spent millions and millions of pounds on them, and they have nowhere to go but back to their drug dealer. Another sort of aspect of the post-bureaucratic age, I think, is about making public services user-friendly. Now, a big idea that I'd love to see in the UK is the idea of a 311 service. Some of you might know that is. In America, if you've got a question about any kind of local government service, you ring 311 and they will point you in the right direction. Now, that is not just a useful thing for all of us. If a tree is fallen on my street, I don't know who to ring. It's a very useful thing for everybody, but it's very important, I think, in terms of equality of access to services as well. Middle class people can generally find their way around the maze of public services pretty well. Quite difficult if you're less educated, you don't really know where to go. And very useful if you could just have a nice, simple number you can ring, and they will push you in the right direction. Part of it, I think, should be about kind of automating services, making as many of them just as easy as possible. I think the DVLA is probably our best public service in many ways in the UK. You apply for your driving licence online, you can do it all online, it gets sent to you in the post, and it's a seamless service like the sort of thing you'd expect in the public sector. But there are massive opportunities to do that elsewhere as well. At the moment, something like 2 or 4% of all benefit claims are done online. That's what, you basically have to turn up to the office, you have to fill in some paper forms, they are sent in sacks to a regional office. Millions of people's benefits are lost every year. A friend of mine who works in a different think tank applied to go on job seekers over the summer. They lost his documents twice. I don't think he ever got his benefits. And this is all because we're not being aggressive enough about forcing people online and using that kind of technology. And the last item in terms of reforming public services, which I think is important in the post-bureaucratic age, is not really about technology at all. It's not about whizzy IT. It's about freeing up the public sector. And again, Francis is making huge strides on this. The problem in the public sector is not just that I think they are excessively generously compensated for the jobs that they're doing. The problem is it's very, very difficult in the public sector to remove weak performers. And it is terrible for the morale of public servants to have to carry people who are bad. The Cabinet Office did a big survey under the last government, and 95% of civil servants and other people in the public sector agreed with the statement: management are too lenient on weak performers in my organisation. And we can't understate how depressing it is and how bad it is for our public services to be carrying loads of people who aren't doing well. I met a senior civil servant a bit back, and he was saying, we set up a new department a few years ago, and what we did, not word of a lie, we created 2 floors in the organisation, all the good people on one floor doing all the work, and all the other duffers on the second floor out of the way, just getting them out of the way. Now, I can't think of a more damning indictment of the way that we do public services in the UK. Very quickly, I think that is the first leg of the post-bureaucratic age, which is about sorting out our public services. The second, and in some ways more kind of whizzy and exciting leg of it, is about bypassing the public service bureaucracies altogether, going completely around them. So, for example, that might be about personal budgets. Don't make people go and sort of deal with social workers to try and get the things they need if they're handicapped. Give them the budget in hand. They can go and buy the wheelchair that they want, buy the kind of home services that they want. There are all these classic stories about spend tens of thousands of pounds on people trying to get the social services they want, and then if you give them a personal budget, they can go off and fix their own problems much more cheaply. I heard a brilliant story about a woman who'd been through social services dozens and dozens of times, and it turns out that all she really wanted was a new light bulb outside her house at 25p. And so this is what personal budgets are all about. That's why they work. Bringing in new competition from the third sector, I think, is exciting. Behaviour changing policies, the famous kind of nudges that everyone got excited about a couple of years ago, I think they are very important. You want to reduce carbon emissions, why don't we give people smart meters in their houses? You can see, if you've ever used one, as soon as you turn the kettle on, you suddenly realise how much your kettle is costing you. And it does change people's behaviour. In university reform, if we're going to charge people a lot more in tuition fees, which we should, we've got to make universities publish the data they've got about what you get in return in terms of teaching hours, what your career prospects are likely to be like. Get them to release all this data. I personally think there is a second category of behaviour changing policies, which I call not nudges but shoves, which are about using cleverly designed financial incentives to get people to do the right thing. So, for example, if we think about transport, I always think when I get on rush hour tube journeys, why don't we have a super peak fare? So we could have lower fare for slightly off peak, but try and have all of the costs of running the tube are in that very peak moment in the morning. If you can have some kind of more flexible pricing structure, then you don't have to waste so much money buying masses of new trains. So I think there is a point there. There is another idea which I think is crucial to the the post-bureaucratic age, which is to do with, instead of having a big target and trying to sort of thrash public services into doing things better, just get the incentives aligned in the right way in the first place. And that strikes me as a small c, a fundamentally conservative insight. So, for example, at the moment, local authorities have a terrifically perverse incentive to get more young people locked up. Because as long as young offenders are, local authorities have to pay for young offenders right up until the point where they go to jail. But if they go to jail, then it comes out of somebody else's budget, and so it's not their problem anymore. Now, you can then see how that kind of perverse incentive would create all kinds of problems. It's the same story in the waste industry, where we have all these mad tonnage targets that cause people to do completely perverse things. It's the same story in planning law as well. Labour thought they could get more houses built by having a really tight planning system, and then John Prescott would come along with a big target, force loads of houses down your throat. No, this is a complete mad way of doing things. You want to have the right incentive for local authorities to get more houses built. Don't force it down their throat, but do give them a financial incentive that causes them to do it. And absolutely last but not least, I think that the antithesis of bureaucracy is democracy. And a big part of the post-bureaucratic age is about having new democratic structures. Local referendums, more national referendums, elected mayors, open primaries, all those kind of concepts. I think those are kind of things which are going to be very tangible for people, and that's what's going to let people know that the post-bureaucratic age has arrived. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Neil. People who are acquainted with Policy Exchange will be shocked by his reference to all the duffers working on the second floor. That's where Neil works. But of course,
in the foot there.
of course, there are no weak performers in Policy Exchange. Francis.
Thank you very much, Charles. Well, the great advantage of opting to go third is there's gratifyingly little left to say, so I get a very easy ride. But I want to, Oliver Letwin has a brilliant, elegant historical narrative of how you go through the pre-bureaucratic age, the bureaucratic age, and post-bureaucratic. I forget some of the details of it, but it starts in the 13th century, and I think the beginning of the bureaucratic age was kind of Henry VII, and the beginning of the installation of central controls, and it goes from there. And there is this sense that there is an inflection point in a very, very long, almost kind of Chinese scale, historical sweep, where there's an opportunity for things to be done differently, and a whole lot of things coming together to enable a different kind of government, society, relationship between citizen and state and society to emerge. Just a word about what those are. And the first point is we are living with the evidence of the failure of the big state, of big government. And I don't just mean the fiscal crisis, where the government's spending £4 for every £3 in revenue, having to borrow literally a third of what we spend just to keep services ticking over and people paid and pensions going out the door and teachers in schools and so on, which is obviously points fairly unavoidably to the need to retrench, for the state to retrench and urgently. But it's also the growing understanding that the big state has contributed to a lot of the social failure that we see, has not been the solution to social problems, it's been the perpetuator and in some ways the aggravator of social problems, in the sense that just relying on the default setting which says here's a problem, the state must provide the answer, that no longer follows. It was almost a kind of implicit assumption for a long time, and people no longer believe it, and they're right not to believe it actually, because that has led to so many of the problems that we face. So failure of the big state, the failure of big government, and the problems created by big government is one factor in today's situation. Second is that people are disillusioned with the ability. People no longer expect the state to be an effective solver of problems, which is related to the first thing. People are themselves generally better educated. They're all the things that Neil was talking about how you expect to exert more control than you would previously have done in so much of what goes on in your life that isn't to do with the government, makes them increasingly impatient of their inability to exert control over the things that are involved in the relationship with the state. So people are more confident about their ability to make choices and to exert control, and they're less deferential, with the age of deference happily passed many years ago, and people expect what they have paid for to be accountable to them. And so there are different expectations in the public, which bears on this. That's the second element, how people feel about themselves and what they feel they're entitled to expect. And the third element is technology, and others will talk much more knowledgeably and persuasively and eloquently about this, but we are at a stage where it is possible for people to have access to much better information about, and again in all the ways Neil's talked about, to enable them to make choices, to know what is being done in their name to a much greater extent, to know what the money is being spent on if we as the state insist on the information being made very readily available. And the technology exists to enable entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs as well as commercial entrepreneurs, to use that information to make it accessible to the public, and for the public themselves to use raw data, raw information, to make it usable and to require change. The information is in this form absolutely translatable into power. So there, without wanting to be too portentous about it, there is some kind of zeitgeist around from all of these changes, the failure of the big state, the expectation people have about what they think they're entitled to, how much control they think they're entitled to exert, and the accountability they're entitled to expect for what they pay for and for the trust they place in the state, and third, the technology which enables those controls and accountability to be exerted. And how should we respond to that? And this is where the idea of, within this post-bureaucratic age, the ideas of a big, strong society, decentralization, transparency, all of these things come together, and it's why we need to drive change rather fast, because there is a moment here where we can, the country, can crystallize this, and something quite new and quite actually exciting emerge from it. Decentralization. Julian talked about the urge to decentralize, which is very strong in the Liberal Democrat tradition, and has been a theme for Conservatives, but not a dominant theme over the years. Some of us have been going on about this for quite some time, and often it's expressed in these terms. People talk about letting go of power, and it isn't quite like that, because all the forces in any big organisation, especially in government, are centripetal. They draw power and decision-taking towards the centre. If you want to decentralise, you have to push power away. But remember, years ago there was a chief executive of General Electric, a huge American corporation, called Jack Welch, who believed strongly in decentralisation. There was a headline reporting one of his speeches which read, "No more top-down command and control at GE, orders Welch." Which sounds absurd, but actually is the way you have to do it. You have to force decentralisation. You don't just let go. And I often say that the process of decentralisation, which occupies much of our energies in government, it does go against the grain. It isn't naturally the way things go. You have to push power away. And in terms of the distribution of power and control, decentralization is the supply side. That's the supply side of power. The demand side is the big society. It is the existence, development, encouragement, strengthening of capacity in communities and neighborhoods to demand the power and exercise it effectively. And you can't, the conclusion we drew just assume that all of this will automatically, organically happen in the timescale needed. 100 flowers may bloom, but we may need to do some gardening and sowing along the way, which is not huge programs. There will not be a gratifyingly, easily schedulable program on creating a big society. This is about lots of small things happening. Training community organizers so that there will be out in communities people who understand about what you need to do in small ways to stimulate, support the creation of neighborhood groups who can take and exercise power and control and exert accountability. Small funds to endow neighborhood groups and enable them to do these things. Something like the National Citizen Service, which will over time, over decades, this is a very long horizon shift, build gradually cohort after cohort of young people through the generations who understand the country they live in better because they've gone through a program with people from all backgrounds and understand the nature of the mix of the country they're in. Who understand more about the need for social responsibility, the need to engage with your community, and the obligations that we have to each other, the bonds of social responsibility. There are loads of small things that can be done to encourage the development of a strong, big society and strong communities and neighbourhoods who can exercise the power and demand the power from the centre. So it isn't just us pushing power from the centre, it is the localities pulling it, demanding it. So all of this is all part of the same very complex scene. And what are the other things that that can contribute to this? Yes, personal budgets, as Neil said. The support for spin-outs, public sector spin-outs, where we're encouraging groups of public sector workers to form themselves into mutuals and co-ops, to take themselves out of the public sector and bid to deliver the same services better, we hope, and cheaper, but as co-owners of their own operation, thus unleashing entrepreneurs. There are lots of entrepreneurs, latent entrepreneurs in the public sector, frustrated by the top-down, target-driven culture, who have ideas about how things can be done better and are deeply frustrated by the inability to make the changes happen. So unleashing that huge economic stimulus, for one thing, the more enterprise there is in our economy, the better, but also potentially transformational for public services, for the delivery of public services. Making more public services available online. You talked, Neil, about the DVLA thing. The transaction cost of renewing your car tax online is 10 pence. Doing it the old way, through paper physical processes, is £1. So by creating the online delivery, you've cut by 90% the cost, and it's a fantastically better experience for the citizen. So it isn't just more for less, it's hugely more for much less, just by doing it very differently. And there's lots of areas, and one of the things we're working on urgently at the moment, and Martha Lane Fox is in the vanguard on this, is developing a whole approach to channel shifting public services in a way that is bureaucratic and old-fashioned and stuck in this very physical, paper-based way of doing it, to online transaction where the citizen feels much more in control of the process, and it's cheaper and it's better. So there's a lot of scope here. So there is a huge, this doesn't fit into a neat, elegant program. The post-bureaucratic age will be less ordered than the bureaucratic age. There's no textbook that tells you how this should look. Just as the capitalist economy has a framework and has some structures, but no one can predict, no one ordains what it should look like, because the essence of a liberal economy is that people find new ways of doing things. They find new things to do. and it's a rich, changing, dynamic scene. The shape of a big society in the post-bureaucratic age will be complex and very dynamic and untidy. It will offend those of a bureaucratic in the wrong sense. There's nothing wrong with good bureaucracy. My office absolutely depends on the good bureaucracy, happily has it. But for people who want everything to be neatly pigeonholed, this will be difficult to accommodate. It will look quite chaotic, quite anarchic almost, but it will be fast-moving, innovative, and it will respond, what happens will respond to what people want. And that's the thing about your point, Julian, about the converse of bureaucracy being democracy. This is about people power. And this is an ancient Tory theme. Trust the people goes back to Randolph Churchill, doesn't it? Trust the people, give people the power. He was talking about the exercise of political power in democracy. We should be thinking so much more widely about the exercise of power in all parts of people's lives. And it won't happen quickly. But that power shift, you need to start making it happen in a different horizon, which is why the horizon shift is so important. And that's why it is such an advantage being a coalition government with a 5-year time horizon. We can think longer than governments typically do, and do so with a broader base of support, which enables us to be more radical than governments have previously been able to be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis, and thank to all our panel. Let's throw it open. Could the people across already forest of hands? Could people just say who they are when they ask a question? I won't necessarily ask the panel. In fact, I won't ask the panel to answer every question automatically because we need to get the discussion moving, and I'll then throw it back in bits. But we'll see how it goes. Gentlemen here in the front row.
Thank you, Andrew Havery, Westminster City Council. I think there's a problem here. I was very interested in the panel's views about the bureaucracy's reaction to all this, which seems to be a combination of resistance and misinterpretation. An example of resistance as a local councillor who deals mainly with the back office functions of this council. When we're trying to make savings, we find we can't make savings because all the officers explain to us that all these things that the coalition government has said it's abolished haven't actually been abolished at all. So we say, well, give us a list then, and we have to have and I want to have my leader, Colin Barrow, speaking directly to Greg Clark all the time to see where
I think he does, actually.
Yes, but we need to see where the failing is and deal with it and that way. And an example of the misinterpretation is this great efficiency and simplification being proposed by the Revenue and Customs of let's take every employee's money and then work out what they're entitled to have, and then pay it back to them. There's a consultation on that, and this coalition government's having a consultation on that when they should be having a consultation on abolishing PAYE so people can see the pain of tax.
Very good. Go to the back. Yes, yeah.
Jessica Crowe from the Centre for Public Scrutiny. We're a charity that promotes better accountability. So very interested in the kind of interplay between sort of forms of direct democracy that we're talking about in terms of elected mayors and referenda and those kind of things, primaries. But those are sort of almost sort of one-off things. And on the other hand, you've got this kind of coming up from the bottom, the kind of thing that Francis Maude was talking about. What happens in between those kind of exercises of democracy, say electing a directly elected mayor who's there for 4 years, and the kind of demand for change and for movement in between? And I think sort of transparency goes somewhere, yeah. But what do people do with all that information? What happens as a result? And is there a role for elected representatives in between elections?
Yes, there, please.
Talking about bureaucracy, it's Patrick Ratnaraja from Croydon Central. Talking about bureaucracy, do you think it's a good idea to create shared service centres for back office functions in all departments, so like accounting and other back office functions can be done in one place, which saves cost and also will be efficient?
Tony Johnson, Cheadle. I'm concerned that local authority chief executives will merely amortize, change their approach and adopt the new language, but carry on as exactly as they are. And I want to know, what we can do to prevent that. We've had a new chief executive, Stockport. He's been given an increase of 30,000 over the previous person. I assume it's because he's taking over NHS responsibilities, and therefore his job description has been expanded. Now we have delegated from the council a certain range of responsibilities for old people's homes, refuse collection, and roads, the whole range of different things. But they are, in-house, standalone, ostensibly non-profit making organisations. There isn't the element of competition, which I think we would like to see. How are we going to actually overcome this and have accountability? And the same thing actually goes in respect of other organisations, the NHS, I'm a governor of the Foundation Trust Hospital, and there are we have no open board meetings. They are going to be open, but we need to have access to information and control. It's no good just talking about the fact that we need to give people power. There have got to be measures and controls to make sure this really happens.
A very important point about the language. I certainly notice that absolutely every scheme that comes up now is suddenly a big society scheme. People are in the shadows, as Claire Short said about Alistair Campbell. Tall chap at the back there. Yeah.
Thank you. Titus Alexander, Nova Scarman and Democracy Matters Alliance. And I'm very encouraged by the talk about people power, increasing demand. But there is a real issue there about people's understanding how the system works. Having worked in local government, I know that even some of my councillors didn't know how the system worked. And so there's a big role there for not just community organisers, but also adult education and community education. So that we've invested quite a lot in adult literacy, which is important, but we also need to invest in political literacy so people can find their way around the system.
And there's a man just by the door there, yes.
Thank you. Francis, good morning. It's Richard Tyree from Good People and Unlimited. As a trustee of Unlimited, I see hundreds of social entrepreneurs every week that are anchored on solving some of their community's most intractable problems. One of the key impediments that we see is the sector's inability to go to scale. I think we can characterise social enterprises by their lack of infrastructure, their lack of capital, and their inability to bid within a traditional commissioning process. We think it's possible to stimulate the appetite amongst UK PLC to work more closely with the social enterprise sector. What are your thoughts about this, Francis?
Can I pause at this point and try to bring this together with the panel? There are lots and lots of points in there, of course, but I think one sort of anxiety that's coming through, and perhaps I could summarise it this way, Francis, is we talk about the post-bureaucratic age, but to put it cynically, we aren't in a post-bureaucratic age, are we? We're in a bureaucratic age. And what people are talking about is how can a bureaucracy bring about a post-bureaucratic age. You made the privatisation, also, I think, Julian made the privatisation comparison. There is a difference. Once a nationalised industry was sold off, obviously there are still regulators, still government concerned, but it fundamentally moved right out of the system. Lots of these services that you're talking about will not move. The system will be reformed, improved, etc. But the accountability goes back to our elected representatives. So how do you actually make it post-bureaucratic?
Well, it won't be done by Christmas. I think that's the first point. You'd say that there are some big things that will be transformational. I think the creation of mayors, directly elected mayors in the great cities will be transformational. I think that will create a direct accountability which is different from the accountability that too much of local government feels it has at the moment, which is to the centre, not to their electors. Just before the election, I was at a dinner with a bunch of local authority chief executives, and the solitary, I'm sorry to say, Tory council leader there started the discussion by saying, Francis, if you're going to be in government, what do you want us in local government to do? To which my rather brisk answer was, I want you to stop asking us what you should do and get on and do what you think your electors want you to do. And one of the chief executives then said, I think you may be underestimating the extent to which this current government, the previous Labour government, has infantilized local government. Absolutely his word, not mine. And you know, I think there's always a problem with devolution. Everyone thinks that devolution should be to the level at which they operate. So everyone in local government thinks that devolution is all about giving them more powers. A lot of it is about that, but that's also about going way beyond that and empowering communities and neighbourhoods and encouraging them to take that. So there are some things you can do which is kind of big bang, make a big change, and which can be transformational. A lot of the rest of it is very slow. I mean, you know, the bureaucratic age, as Oliver will tell us, has lasted, whatever it is, 600 years. So we're not going to turn it off by Christmas, probably not by Easter next year either. This is a long shift, but there are, what's the right way to put this? The combination of where we are together with the technology that now exists enables this process to be massively accelerated. But you do need to have bureaucrats who turn off the bureaucratic processes. And you know, is this all turkeys and Christmas? Well, there's a bit of that, but not. I mean, Andrew's point about resistance from bureaucrats saying can't do it, not allowed to. Push back. Quite often when you're told you can't do things, it's not true. You can. I mean, what I always say to my fellow ministers, having me being a dinosaur from the previous age of Conservative government, the biggest mistake ministers make is to underestimate how much ability you have to make a difference. And you will confront what looks like a brick wall, where you can't go any further, and you can walk through it, because it turns out to be made of paper. And you can go through probably 9 or 10 of those. You will eventually come up against a brick, what actually is a brick, where you really can't do what you want to do, in which case you can try and get that change. But one of the things David Young has hit on, with one of these really simple transformational things in his review of health and safety culture, is to create the ability for the citizen or a business, when you're told you can't do something, you're given advice from an authority that you can't do something, you've got to do it in a certain way, put it in writing. And it's amazing how often that melts away. That then it turns out actually, wow, it isn't so much that you can't do it, but there's some sort of best practice or some guidance, or even actually someone's just winging it. Some official is just busking it and just randomly telling you can't do it, and actually you can. And so we need to be, all of us, I mean, we need citizens who feel confident enough to push back and not take no for an answer, councillors who will do the same, MPs and ministers who will do the same. Be assertive. I mean, the age of deference is over. Just because someone who comes from a government agency tells you can't do something doesn't mean you can't do it. So it's the age of rebellion.
Don't either panel want to come in at this point? Do you want to add anything on this?
I might just make a quick point, which sort of addresses several of the questions, which is the role of local government in the post-bureaucratic age and in the big society. And I think this is one area where, if we're honest, there's more thinking to be done. I mean, Francis was saying that the Lib Dems have long stood for decentralisation, and it's true, but in quite a limited way. I think the Lib Dems have got a bit of a blind spot, truth be told, about decentralisation. They've always viewed decentralisation as moving power from one set of politicians and bureaucrats in Whitehall to another set of politicians and bureaucrats in the town hall. And that's it. Now, you know, that doesn't do it for me, because I think that most people living busy lives don't really distinguish between Whitehall and the town hall. If anything, the town hall, although geographically closer to where they live, is probably more remote in many ways, more faceless, less accessible to them. So, and this is why I think, again, the sort of fusion politics that comes out of coalition is so interesting here, because I think that what the Conservatives have added to Lib Dem thinking is the idea that when talking about decentralisation, you have to go well beyond local government. You have to push power far, far, far further down to put it in the hands of individuals themselves, community groups, social entrepreneurs, and others. But this does leave you with the question of what is the rightful role of local government going forward, and you know, the tension, I think, is perhaps best illustrated by looking at Michael Gove's schools reforms. I'm a huge enthusiastic supporter of free schools, academies, and the creation of a liberalised, diverse, state-funded school system. But working out who's going to regulate these schools, who's going to issue them licences and withdraw licences, who's going to monitor the standards and so forth, is an interesting one. I mean, the Gove model, based, I suspect, on a concern about obstructionism at local government level, is basically the model of the 250-mile screwdriver from Whitehall. You know, the micromanage. I'm not sure that's going to work when we've got, you know, 1, 3, 7,000 free schools in decades to come. So we do have to find a role for local government in the post-bureaucratic age, and exactly what that's going to look like, I think there's more thinking to be done.
Yes, gentleman in the front row here.
Councillor Francis, time scale. To get from, in a medium-sized district council, from 16 million unsustainable budget to 13 million sustainable has taken us however many years with a lot of member input, because the culture in the public sector of even intelligent managers is to look around asking for permission to change their working practices.
Yeah.
And we can be criticised for that because we, who are the councillors who are meant to be checkers, have been involved in basically doing managers' jobs. Now, if we've had to do that in a medium-sized district council to change, and now we are getting the right people in, we are becoming more customer-focused, but that's after many years of preparation. How is that going to play out at national level in huge government departments with mega budgets?
Richard Dowd from formerly of Somerset, but now living in France as a result of British justice. School, which I'll cover at another time. But school, I've been an A-level maths teacher for 40 years and simply paid my taxes and forced to move to France because I was prosecuted by the RSPCF for docking my public's tales. But what I've seen, compared with the professionalism, integrity and everything in schools and classrooms, which have their own agenda and are very efficient, very accountable, what I've seen in British law courts is absolutely appalling in those standards. What seems to have happened is that the last government has produced all this plethora, this frenzied stream of lawmaking with prescribed sentences, criminalising a lot of ordinary people for very little thing. There are no discharges, no sort of, nobody forgives anybody anything. And there is no natural process of osmosis from court level all the way up to the lawmakers. They're very badly drafted, a lot of these laws, and we're stuck with them. Every time I talk to colleagues here at conferences, well, you know, I don't know that we can change it just yet, kind of thing. And that is where there is actually no natural process of communication whatsoever, from what I can see. And the dishonesty, the lack of competency, the interminable waits. I mean, some of these cases, I'm still 2.5 years.
Sorry, forgive me, I just bring doors to close because there's so many, but
you know, that just in a nutshell is a bit, and I would say, and honestly, it's no better than a banana republic. I'm from South Africa here. I think justice was more efficient there.
Thank you. Lady on the row there, yeah.
Hazel Powell, Surrey Heath. Well, I've been made redundant twice, and I'm looking forward to a quick order of the boot to vast thousands of public sector service before Christmas. You can get in a 3 months' notice. But actually, introducing locally elected mayors and police collection only adds another layer, who also want support. But my second major point is, although I spent half my career in telecoms, I had no internet access at home for very good technical and political reasons. Other people will be disenfranchised because they couldn't afford anything at all. Now, I don't see why we should be put at a disadvantage.
Thank you.
Put me in touch with Martha Lane Fox.
Gentleman behind
Simon Hussey, taxpayer. Surely a very simple idea that could be enforced immediately about transparency is that everybody, when you deal with any service bank or otherwise, you get a statement. Why doesn't the Inland Revenue send every taxpayer a statement? No, but actually, with a breakdown of every penny that is spent, it's very easy, where your £10,000 has actually been spent, and then people would all of a sudden realise how much is going on debt service, how much is going to education, how much to health. All of a sudden, these services get personalised by you being able to see where your actual physical cash has gone. And it's a great way of enforcing change.
Thank you. I think we'd better be the last question, because I want the panel to say a few words. Yes, gentlemen, sort of blocking the gangway there, yes.
Yes, John Butch from Surrey County Council. I'd like to ask a question that actually Francis himself can do something about as Minister of the Cabinet Office, which is the problem of us ordinary people being able to communicate with ministers. Normally what happens is the letter goes into the Ministerial Correspondence Unit, a computer generates a response, and if you're lucky you might get one. If you're unlucky you'll never hear any more. I believe that the system that was introduced by the last government needs drastic reform, and I do urge you to do something about it. But please don't ask me to write to you about it, because I don't expect you to.
We almost left your question too late for him to answer it. I think we'd better get the panel to sum up. Neil, start with Neil.
Okay, so there's a very good question about what are all these new elected officials going to do as sort of police accountability and that. Police accountability, I think is going to work well, and I think it's a better model than general local government, where you're voting basically now, because local government is so weak, people basically vote on national issues when they like the government, which is terrible. In police accountability, they will be voting squarely on issues about how you run the police in that area, and that will be a much better form of accountability. I hope that model will be extended, because people always, and this is again a kind of point about the post-bureaucratic age, people are forever complaining in public services about things not being joined up, agencies don't speak to each other. And if you have someone who is accountable, if you have, say, a police and justice commissioner, then you can join all the services up. So the same person who's in charge of looking over the shoulder of the police is also doing probation, the prisons. You can make all these people bang heads together and make them all work together. So I think there is, local accountability has all these kind of potentials to it. Richard Tyree asked a brilliant question earlier on about commissioning and the way that locks out interesting businesses. If you want to provide a government service and take up a contract, you'll normally get some sort of 3,000-page application, which, unless you're a huge company, then you really can't. You can never fill it. And also, even for those huge companies, just by specifying everything to death, the government loses all the value of contracting things out to third parties and doing things in a more innovative way. So I think it's just a very, very important point. And the last point about what if you're not on the net? Well, I think that's a good point, a fair one. I think you can deal with that though. In job centres, there is a PC in everyone. Even if they actually go to the job centre and use the net there, that at least means we won't lose all their documents and waste loads of money on administration. So I think it's a fair point, but one that we can deal with.
Julian.
Just a very quick point in response to the gentleman's question about individual accounts almost. Where has your tax dollar gone? I mean, those of you who work in local government will probably know about the Total Place initiative. And this was the idea that you would take a geographical area, a town or what have you, and then you would analyse where every single pound spent in that area went across all the different agencies, and you begin to realise the horizontal linkages between these different agencies, and you hopefully can identify the duplication and the omission inherent to that. Not content with this, people in sort of the think tank world are now talking about total person, which is a bit what sounds like what you're talking about, which is to start with the individual. And then you work out just how many tax pounds are going on them and how many different agencies are spending it and all the rest of it. Now, all of this is intelligent, joined up government, but it's actually, and this comes back to the point I was making earlier about the role of local government, it's actually a different model from the one we're going down towards at the moment. This is a model which would work best if you had a strong, powerful local government figure like a mayor, a city mayor, who was responsible for all the spend in the area and could take an overview of that. That's not really what we have in this country. We have the school system accountable to the Department of Education. We have GPs and hospitals accountable to the Department of Health and so forth. And we're working it in, we're decentralising, but we are decentralising within silos. And it comes back to the point I made, which is that I'm not sure we've entirely thought through the role of local government.
I'll ask Francis to sum up. Can I just add one point, Francis? It's very, very fascinating discussion, but one very important word has hardly come up, which is money. Money, first of all, is short, as we all know now. Secondly, it's always power and money go very closely together. And I'd like to know more about how a post-bureaucratic age can be created with where money ends up and where it comes from.
Okay, I mean, just pick up a few of those points. John's point about contact with ministers. Obviously, I'm going to make it immensely easier for people to write directly to me. I want the quality of my life to improve. But I hear the point, I do understand it, and I will look at it. And your point about money. You're quite right, we haven't really talked about it, but actually it's underlying all of this, because money and power are absolutely associated. And actually what Julian was just talking about local services, is all about where the money sits. Now, I'll say a little bit about that. Yeah. Someone earlier asked about shared services, and which is a way of potentially of saving money. And there's huge scope for it, massive scope for across, particularly in two-tier local government areas, integrated between the tiers and the district councils together, doing stuff together. Shouldn't be that hard to do. It is bloody hard to do, because everyone thinks it should be their services, which are the shared services. Everybody else should share their services. And often the best way to do it is to outsource it. But actually one of the elements you should be looking at is encouraging those who provide the service to spin out and create a mutual, often with an outsourced provider as a joint venture partner, often with the council retaining a carried interest in it, so that actually, if it does brilliantly well, then a bit of the state which is contributed to it shares in the success, and it's just kind of a better, everyone's interests are then aligned. So, and Richard's point about scale, completely right, we've talked about this before, huge scope for encouraging, enabling, supporting successful models to be replicated and built out more gradually. Finance is crucial to that, but also the involvement of successful corporates who do know this is kind of what they do, and a business model that works here will make it work there, and that, and it hasn't worked nearly so much in the social sector, and it can do, but money will be important, which is why the big systematic bank, we are absolutely committed to the social idea of a social investment bank has been around forever, and no one's actually made it happen. We are absolutely determined to make it happen and get it up and running in the course of next year. The point about those who either can't or won't use the internet to transact, how do you enable them not to be completely excluded from being able to transact with the government? Well, actually, there are lots of ways of doing this, and one of them is you do not need to keep a physical office for every government activity in every place. What you can do is use something called the post office or libraries, where there can be people who's with the same internet availability who can help people who are not wanting to do it themselves to do it, or do it for them. And that's a much better, cheaper, quicker, better quality way of solving the problem. Just the issue about Julian was talking about. The total place pilots was actually, it was a good idea, but has not yielded any good results because it was very top down. I mean, where the original 13 or whatever it was total place pilots, the first thing they did was say, you will have a budget of £250,000 to run it, and you must appoint a director for the total place pilot. And then the next phase is massive research on where the money is being spent. I have not yet heard, and I may be out of date and misinformed, I have not yet heard of a single instance as a result of the total place pilots of pools of money actually being put together to support problem solving in a locality. I mean, there's a lot. The problem is much better understood, but the actual result, which is getting money out of the silos, out of the stovepipes, into a single pool, which can be applied in a forceful way to solve an immediate social problem, hasn't, as far as I understand it, happened. You have to do this in a much more bottom-up, localized way, a sort of hyper-local way, very, very granular, which is why, in the commissioning services, where the money thing is so important, Charles. And it's very difficult to make this happen in our kind of very audit culture, risk-averse culture environment. But there are ways of putting the money in the hands of organisations which will commission locally. Turning Point, which is one of the best social enterprises around, has a programme called Connected Care, where they go into local authorities, for local authorities, do detailed research in an estate on what are the actual needs of that estate, the people on that estate. Indeed, going even more granular, what are the needs of that family, which may cost, we know, a family can cost the taxpayer hundreds of thousands of pounds a year if you aggregate all the costs that family has for the taxpayer, and then commissions those services on an integrated basis around the needs of that family, that neighbourhood, that block in that estate, that estate. So there's no rigid pattern to this, but you have to find a way of putting that money in the hands of someone, which will probably not be the state. It will probably be some civil society organisation, a social enterprise, whatever. It may be a mutual, actually, a cross-cutting mutual formed by people who provide the services from different kinds of silos who come. And some of the Pathfinder mutuals we're supporting at the moment are formed from different groups of people providing different kinds of services which have an overlap. The final point. So this is there's a massive, massive prize in getting this right, and it's very difficult to do. And it will not be universal, or by definition not be universal. Final point on accountability: does creating mayors, elected police commissioners simply create another layer? No, it absolutely doesn't. There are things called police authorities. I do not know, as a local member of parliament, I probably would if I really racked my brains, but I can't immediately think who is the chairman of the Sussex Police Authority. He will probably be someone I know, but he or she is not a figure who bulks large in my life, because I know that the police authority does not particularly primarily look to the residents of Sussex for guidance. They look to the Home Office, because the accountability is upwards, not downwards, outwards to the citizen. And so what you will have with an elected police commissioner is not a new layer of bureaucracy. It is that person will be the police commissioner, who will be elected by the residents and will be held to account by the residents. And that's what it ought to be. Residents who are better informed, because they will have crime mapping, they will be seeing where the crimes are being committed. Are the police actually responding quickly, efficiently, effectively to the demands of residents and the needs of the locality? So I have absolutely no doubt it will not create extra layers, but it will create much stronger accountability. And the sooner it happens, the better.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all very much for coming, and warm thanks to our distinguished panel. Francis said the age of deference was dead, but I do think if I had a forelock left, I would tug it in deference to Francis's achievements in seeing all these problems so long ago and now trying to do something about them. So thank you all very much.